Healthy at any size? More like crazy at any size. Welcome to Common Filth Radio. Glad you're listening. This week you're looking at artwork from Feminist Tears, Dingus, and Jack, if he gets it in on time, before Tuesday when I edit the video and upload it to YouTube. Jack doesn't have a Facebook page, but Feminist Tears and Dingus do, which I've linked down below, so go give them a like, check them out, all that good stuff. I set up an email address this week on my web hosting. It's commonfilth@commonfilth.com. Now you can email me your questions or anything else you want to contact me about. As I said a few seconds ago, I upload the show every Tuesday. We are all directly familiar with the names of the days of the week. But it wasn't until recently that I got curious and looked up why the days of the week are named what they are. It turns out that most of the names are derived from European mythology, Nordic mythology to be specific. I won't bore you by listing all the gods associated with the different days of the week, but the one relevant to us is Tuesday, and that is derived from Tyr. This god is a god associated with law, and he has one hand and is also equated with Mars. Now, this is just a very basic overview. It's nothing you couldn't find out on your own if you looked it up yourself. But there is a reason why I am mentioning this subject. I posted some screenshot of somebody bitching about cultural appropriation on Tumblr regarding clothing that people wear and how that's so oppressive, blah, blah, blah. You know what they say. And there was an anti-white bent to it as well. That's another given. But there's somebody that commented on the screenshot that I posted, and they say this is ridiculous because this assumes that white people have a culture of their own. At first, this made me angry because it's dismissive and shitty, and just I don't like that kind of rhetoric that's just like, oh, implying, like you're trying to play a game of gotcha. But then I realized the person who's probably making the comment. And it's most likely some 19-year-old shithead who has had a year of college and really knows about the world now because they watched a Spike Lee movie in a prerequisite freshman entry-level bullshit class. So once I took a step back from that comment and didn't react to it immediately and thought about it, I wasn't mad anymore. Because this person probably has a very narrow definition of culture, which is informed by their underdeveloped lizard brain and morality, that places a premium on having fun and hedonism and nothing else. Because what is music? What is dancing? What are movies? It's just something for enjoyment. Something for stimulation. Ultimately, these are just diversions and don't really say too much about the true nature of a people. But if you're uninterested with human nature and human behavior, I guess all culture is to some moron is silly hats and a funny dance. True culture is an impulse, a default behavior, found in the rhythm of daily life. And what is more daily and ordinary than knowing what day of the week it is? While we can see the manifestation of certain impulses in a given people through music, dance, cuisine, whatever, we don't see the impulses driving these things to be created. It is the impulse where the culture lies. It is in the passions of a people where you find the culture. But if you're listening this far, you probably already knew that, or at least had some vague idea of it. So I'm not out to convince the moron hedonist that culture is more than just silly dances and music and having fun and whatever. I just wish I didn't have to encounter them on a constant basis. Let's start off by answering the leftover questions from last week. This question is from Shay. I believe you've touched on this subject before, but how do you feel about the recent surge of random gun violence in American schools, and how do you think it can be prevented, addressed? Do you believe in more gun control, or do you believe in more security? As it appears that these incidents are becoming more commonplace in the U.S., do you think the reason is more of our cultural makeup, or is it a result of a failing education system / parenting? Or maybe I should ask, why does the issue of gun violence in school appear unique when compared to the statistics of the same thing in other countries? Why do you think there seems to be more of these incidents here in the US or just gun violence in general? To answer the first part of your question, I do believe that we need more security and less medication. A lot of these shootings, mass shootings, have strong links to antidepressant use on the behalf of the shooter. So now that I think about that, revisiting the idea, crazy people generally don't care if there's security or not, even though it is a deterrent in most cases. But even if added security, armed security at, for example, elementary or middle schools, the presence might not be a deterrent, but it can prevent a lot of death from occurring. Security would seem to be a deterrent and it would deal with the symptom, but I think the disease is psychoactive drugs being used on young people. But I don't believe in gun control as a solution because it's usually only when gun violence happens in that kind of situation that you hear about it. You don't hear about too much self defense occurring because police don't file a report because there's no crimes being committed. And maybe they do file a report just to say that it happened, but no one is arrested and no one is put to trial over it. I hear a lot about gun violence that occurs in Chicago, and Chicago has some pretty strict gun control laws, so it's not doing them much good. You bring up a good point in that gun violence with regard to school shootings is low, very low in other places. But I don't think that's a function of the fact that America has a lot of guns. For example, in Switzerland, basically all men know how to use a firearm and are required to undergo training with regard to operation of firearms. America's just full of a lot of crazy people. I hammer home the point a lot about dysgenic breeding. And while that certainly plays a role in people who are more violent, it certainly is not helped by the fact that we medicate a lot of our children. This question has inspired me to look more into gun violence in educational facilities and the connection between antidepressant use to see if there's anything there, because I think that's a subject worth exploring. I certainly know that a lot of mass shootings in America have been linked to antidepressant usage. So, going to look into that, and I will report my findings once I am comfortable giving something more definitive. This one's from James. What is it about these people that you feature on Tumblr does that make them so angry at normality? I'm not talking about the sick sexual deviants. I mean the people who get visibly angry at the idea of calling a baby a boy or a girl. How can they get so angry at something so simple? I once read that a recent convert usually has the most vocal, shrill, loudest opinion regarding whatever they've converted to. And the religion to which they've converted is the Church of Egalitarianism. And it's usually the same kind of person that I mentioned earlier a few minutes ago. That it's usually somebody who took a few college classes and had their minds blown by their late 20-something teacher. And that teacher, that professor, probably learned it from their professor, who's probably some ponytailed hippie who wants to hang around children all day for some reason. So that's what you're dealing with out there. Soft-brained, uncurious people who are drawn to the first idea that are introduced to them by somebody charismatic enough. People these stupid 18-year-old kids can relate to that are also in a place of authority. So it's usually young people. I don't know too many old people with these ideas. So other than those that work at universities, those that have never created anything in their lives, those that would not have a job if it were not for the charity of the taxpayer. For now, I'm going to chalk it up as indiscretion of youth. That would be my answer as to why people get so angry over simple things like, is your child a boy or a girl? It is as baffling to me as it is to you why people get angry over people painting their child's bedroom a certain color. We used to take for granted that boys and girls were different, but now everybody has undergone this indoctrination that all parts are interchangeable and that there's no inborn differences in people. And to go off the example that you gave in your question, You can't raise boys the same way that you raise girls because they react to things differently. Girls grow up to be women who are capable of some amazing things. They can squeeze a giant baby out of a tiny little hole. And they're generally very good managers of a small unit like a home. And we were all raised by mothers, hopefully, the most well adjusted among us anyway. But women generally aren't suited towards the rigors of modern life, which is why children of single mothers usually grow up to be criminals. And if those kids don't grow up to be criminals, they usually have psychological issues. Men are more psychologically equipped to deal with the rigor and complexity of the demands of society. That's why in a typical family unit, the man goes off for 8 hours a day doing some thankless bullshit for some asshole making him rich, and the woman stays at home and takes care of the children. There was a time where what I'm saying now would have been a no brainer. I would say this and it wouldn't be some profound truth to anybody. It would just be like, yeah, okay, you're just putting into words what everybody already knows. But now we're rediscovering these basic truths because they've been obscured for so long, for so many generations. The knowledge that our ancestors had thousands of years back, that men and women are fundamentally different, has only been undone in the last 100 or so years. It's a lot easier to build than it is to destroy, and it takes a lot longer to build something than it is to destroy something. Thousands of years of human progress regarding knowledge of human nature has been undone, and it's we who are discovering it now. And it's going to take a long time for there to be a mass awakening regarding what was previously known. People nowadays find it more appealing to turn people into a novelty sideshow act. Calling the people on Tumblr who want to inject hormones into newborn babies people is like treating them like a fellow human being, which they aren't. And that's another thing I like to talk about because usually when you see people who are posting these kinds of things, they usually bemoan gender stereotypes. Yet, if a lady wants to become a man or a man wants to become a lady, they usually only look at the superficial aspects of what makes a man and what makes a woman, not the psychological drive that really makes them who they are. So, James, I hope I sufficiently answered your question there. That's about as thoroughly as I can talk about it right now. All right, let's move on. Next question is from Dallas. Hello, I have a question for Common Filth Radio about gym and working out. I have been going to gym now for the last year or so to stop being a beta loser shut-in and have more self-respect. I was wondering if you think that gym is an essential part of being a virtuous male member of society, or do you think that gym is a waste of time and that the contemporary culture surrounding gym is degeneracy and that I'm just buying into the Iron Jew capitalist media machine? I'll first say that I wish I thought up of the term you used, Iron Jew, because that's hilarious. I don't know too much about gym culture, but if it's working for you for what you want to use it for, which is, like you said, stop being a beta loser and have more self respect, I don't know if those things are true or not, but if they're working for you, keep doing it. I've been to visits at gyms a few times, and they are what they are. They're a place to work out for cheaper than what you can buy exercise equipment for. So, just from a practical perspective, I could see why one would get a gym membership if they can't afford exercise equipment or they live in a small apartment. Yeah, it's a practical thing. As far as gym being essential to being a virtuous male, I don't see that. I just think that you need to not be a fat or scrawny piece of shit, that you should be able to lift a certain amount of weight, you know. You don't want to be some loser who can't lift up his own furniture, you know. And that would figure to be a problem for like the types who don't actually do any real work with their bodies, with their arms and legs. Having a gym membership would just be redundant if you actually did manual labor and you came home and your body was tired after a hard day's work. But I don't know if that's your situation, so keep doing what you're doing. I have a lot of admiration for people who realize that they have a problem and take proactive steps in repairing that problem. But you seem to be doing that, and I don't know whether or not you're being hard on yourself, but if it's working, keep doing it, and good luck in the future. I'm rooting for you. Someone's gonna have to tell me more about the Iron Jew because that's too funny. I've never heard that term before until now. Maybe if they're selling it like, oh, come to the gym and meet lots of hot chicks. You're a super hot guy and you'll get lots of hot chicks. Which I've been to the gym and I've never seen any mingling going on, so maybe that's what they're talking about if I had to have a guess at it, but I don't know. Has anybody out there tried to run gym game on some girl? Off of some cardio bunny, as they call him? Someone's got to let me know. I bet a few of you out there have tried. Anyway, let's get to the next question. Actually, now that I think about it, Dallas had a question about Young Lean, and I know who Young Lean is. I just don't listen to a lot of hip hop or rap or whatever you want to call it. So, not the person to ask on that. All right. This question I can talk a little bit more about. This one is from Massey. It seems like the majority of the youth use this mediated virtual space we call the internet to create a social economy where the commodities are ourselves. I blame this on an embodiment of relationship forming between participants and the media, Twitter especially, rather than desire and satisfaction. Facebook leaves you room to be yourself, but it always leans towards image crafting for the teenage void. My question to you, consequentially, what do you foresee happening to society now that our greatest tool, the internet, is used mostly to search for validation rather than the truth? Do you think it will change the very composition of our human psychology? Is internet profiling doomed? This is a great question because it highlights a fundamental difference in how we treat internet now versus how it was treated back when it was first beginning to be introduced to the regular consumer. Just go watch some VHS rips of a show like The Computer Chronicles or that Windows 95 instructional video with Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry. They really hammered home the point of the information superhighway. You can go on the internet and search the sum of human knowledge. It's all at your fingertips. It wasn't until much later that we decided to use the internet to glorify ourselves. I mean, you saw it, some of it with GeoCities, like people had their personal pages, but, that wasn't anything too significant. Nobody actually went on those. So while a small germ of narcissism was beginning to emerge, it kept itself relatively discreet for some period of time. But since the advent of the internet, at least the common usage of the internet, we've seen American society and Western society splinter into all these very different specific groups, all with competing interests, and people don't know how to navigate it anymore because we aren't one people. So what do? We start cocooning because society is just becoming too complex. And that's because we're a very large society now, and larger societies are more difficult to navigate and find meaningful social roles within. So most people who want to take the path of least resistance, which there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, it just depends on where the path leads them. But because everything is so large now and complex, the least complex thing now is the self. And I think that the narcissism now that we display using what you call our greatest tool is because it's a reaction. This narcissism is a reaction. And this reaction, I don't think, is necessarily conscious. I don't think anybody wants to glorify themselves, because if they took a step back and took stock of the things that make up their character, they would find a lot of things that they don't like. But now that people have this outlet where they can filter all the bad parts about them and put all the best parts for everybody to see on their friends list, we don't have that introspection anymore. I don't think that it's changing human psychology, the nature of how internet is used now. I just think it's a manifestation of human weakness. And because we can now glorify the self without any real consequence, most people can't be buggered to seek the truth. Most people don't want to know the truth because the truth isn't a feel-good thing. Reality is very depressing, but it becomes less depressing if you're not so self-oriented. If you have a family to look after, a group to look after, a church community, whatever it is, something that's small and manageable and can feel your personal influence upon it, you become less depressed about things. That's another reason why people are more self-oriented, is because there's nothing to channel their energies into. There's nothing to be made better other than their personal image. I think that if it were easier to find something to apply truth to, like the things that I just mentioned, people would let go of themselves a little more. But the state of Western culture now makes it very difficult to find something worthy. And even if they do find something that they see as worthy, it's really not. So many millennials have hitched their trailer, or whatever you want to call it, whatever analogy, metaphor you want to use. They've put their alliances in with, like, gay rights, for example. And that gay rights in and of itself is just nothing more than a glorification of the self. It's a worshipping of how a particular set of people achieve orgasm. And that's just one example. There are probably a million others I can't think of right now which you can apply this reasoning to. That even when somebody tries to improve something other than themselves, it's really just another form of crass individualism. Like the society in which they are contained, the problems are just a mess. But I see two individual threads which I think, if they're pulled at, can unravel the whole thing, the whole mess, and that's dysgenic breeding and narcissism. But maybe we can use the great tool that is the internet to undo some of this damage, some of these prevailing attitudes and behaviors and trends. I've been told that the pendulum always swings. It gets good and then it gets bad. There's a reaction. And I see a little bit of it, but it's not that significant. I look at the average. I look at what the whole is doing, or where the whole is going as an average. And I see us on a downward slide. I don't think humans have improved at all in the last 100 years. But I acknowledge that I could very well be wrong. I've been wrong even on this show before. For example, a couple weeks ago I was asked if the Facebook pages I run and the people in our little sphere of influence run would have an impact on society at large. I said no. That was my prediction. But a few weeks later, Daily Dot publishes an article and one of my pages is in it. Pages I've interacted with are in it. So I could be wrong about this prediction, but I think we are doomed. At least our generation is anyway. And maybe in 100 years, 200 years, people will get sick of our shit and there will be some return to normalcy. I'm gonna try to forget about you before you throw me away. So I wait for no man, so I'm gonna make the most of the sun before you throw me away. I received a lot of questions about technology this week, and it's not something I talked about too much. I think I talked about it a few weeks ago, but got a few more. The previous question was one of them, and now I will answer another. I actually have a couple questions about technology, so here's the first one I'll answer. From Shauna. Do you think technology has advanced or enslaved us? A few weeks ago I said that technologies are just neutral tools and it's how we use them that define whether or not they are good or bad. And right now I got to admit most people aren't very good, so the uses of technology aren't very good. In fact, there's a lot of it is quite evil. Technology is becoming invasive not only in our personal lives, but in our persons, our bodies. And this next question from Kellen almost serves as an answer to your question. He wrote to me, I'm sitting here watching the news, and they were talking about people who actually have implantable technology, essentially turning them into cyborgs. And given your feelings about the ZOG machine, I can guess what you're going to say, but how do you feel about implantable technology? There's a lot of skepticism, which I think a lot of people probably looked at like, "Well, you're crazy, you're stupid for thinking this." With regard to something like Neuromancer, which dealt with a lot of themes of body horror as applied to technology invading the body. We are now 30 years beyond that book being published when it was first published, and we are seeing themes that were explored in that book actually coming to fruition. The main character in that book was not allowed to engage in the mainstream economy because his nervous system was infected with something which prevented him from accessing cyberspace. That's real Mark of the Beast Revelations type stuff. It was a pipe dream back then to have body implants that are like robotic parts of you, but now you're seeing it on like the nightly news or whatever it is. It's fully mainstream now. And the fact that it's fully mainstream is leading me to believe that the powers that be are now conditioning people into like thinking that it's okay and it's cool to have it. And look, you're like the $6 million man or whatever. So while it's probably like the type of people who wait in line for the new iPhone at the Apple Store that are getting these types of things, it's only a matter of time before it trickles down into mainstream suburban America. I shouldn't have to make the argument that these things are unequivocally bad. This is something that is unquestionably bad. Altering the state which God or nature decided you to be. You don't fuck with that. And who knows, maybe this is a sign of the end times that God is telling his people get ready because you're in for a fight. I don't want to get into doomsday prophecies too much though, but I think because things are already bad enough as it is if you just take a look around. So the answer to Shauna's question is technology is enslaving us, but it's of our own choice. We're being convinced, we're being seduced by it. And what Kellen saw on the news is just proof of that. There's a reaction to this program that I upload every week that I find odd. And that reaction is, I'm a right wing crazy, or the show is too right wing. But I don't talk a lot about politics on this show. The people I talk about might have certain political proclivities. For example, they might like Obama and do these kinds of fundraisers or whatever. But I think that the politics is just an extension of their beliefs and who they are. And who they are is somebody that I don't like. Their politics have very little to do with it. I'm not like a Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or Michael Savage type that can talk for 5 days a week, 3 hours a day about Obama and whatever some politician's doing. It's just obsessive compulsive to me, that kind of thing. So there's very little of my value system that's wrapped up in the political events of the day. Obama has done a lot of disgraceful things which seem to have already been forgotten for the most part, and really they're not worth bringing up because if they're only worth bringing up to somebody who would disagree with you. And if you bring up a fact like, he botched the war in Afghanistan or the Gulf oil spill or any of these other things, they'll just deny it and like obscure the facts and just be like, "Oh no, he didn't. He did this," and there's no point in it because people are going to believe what they're going to believe. We know all about drone warfare and killing Pakistani villagers and other really ridiculous things like that, but they don't care. Even if they did confront that truth, they just find a way to rationalize it. Uncurious people who feel like they need to be informed about things are it's not fair to call them uncurious, but if they were more curious, they wouldn't focus on here today, gone tomorrow things like the political system. Our problems aren't political, they're psychological. And it might seem that politics might be a problem, but that's just that's the what's happening to politics is just a symptom of a greater problem. So that's why I don't want to go into politics because I think there's very little change that can happen to American culture through politics, through legislation. So I don't necessarily disagree with the right-wing label that people assign to me. I just find it odd that they come to that conclusion because very little of what I talk about on a weekly basis has to do with Barack Hussein Obama or the Democrats or the Republicans. It's not, I'm not really fully interested in that. So please keep that in mind when I'm answering this question. It has to do with left wing, right wing. And I'm not referring to their politics, I'm referring to the general kind of behavior that certain people exhibit of certain political leanings. This question is from Nick, and it goes like this. What is your opinion on the left wing and their complete lack of trying to debate with reason? Every time I try to bring up a point, they always turn to the defensive and attack on a personal level. Thanks. There's a lot of deep contradictions in leftist thought and what they want as policy and the kind of rhetoric and points they bring up. So, of course, they generally call you like a shitlord or something, or you have too much privilege or something, some default thing that they can go to just to say, haha, I got you. They never actually point out the flaws in whatever you're trying to argue. It's always like you're a racist or you're a sexist or some generic policy like, well, you don't need this many bullets in your gun. Stupid things like that. But we're already familiar with all the generic leftist tropes, so just talking about it is just like a big circle jerk, and we don't really get anywhere with that. We want to know why they are the way they are, and I think a useful roadmap into figuring that out is to look at the RK theory, R selected type species and K selected type species. I'm going to go over this very, very base level, skimming the surface type thing. If you want to find more about this and become introduced to the idea that there's R selected and K selected type politics and social leanings, the Anonymous Conservative has a really great article on it, and you can find that at anonymousconservative.com. Basically, liberals are R selected type species, and that they want everything to be unlimited resources, easy breeding, no real consequences, no real future orientation, no real conservation of limited resources. Whereas K-selected type species, conservatives, are oriented around preserving limited resources and having a select number of offspring. This is why conservatives embrace competition on the general. And in competition, there's a winner and there's a loser. But the R-selected types, they don't want that. R-types don't want to compete, which is why they don't argue with you as an equal, because they are inferior. They're only looking to impress their large group of friends by whatever stupid means they achieve that. That's why in an argument they will call you a racist or sexist or misogynist or any kind of ist, and that's supposed to be inherently bad. It's not as if they argue with you to convince you of their point. They argue to impress their very large group, very large, simple-minded, hive-minded group. Because really, what does a racist or a sexist mean to somebody who gets called that? It's just noise, at least to somebody who acknowledges the bullshit for what it is. This is why I get disappointed at a lot of these so-called conservatives who are like, liberals are the real racists, because they're just using their rhetoric and they're playing into their game. But that's a little bit of a different point. But I hope I've got you on the right track as to why they argue the way they argue. It's certainly my opinion, and it's backed up by some pretty convincing facts. Next up are some questions about Christianity and religion and how I feel about that. First one is from Philip. And he asks me, "Hey, Common Filth, I have a question on your opinion on salvation. From your point of view as a Christian, how is one saved or gained salvation from God? We first have to realize that we're all pieces of shit, and we are naturally that way. And it's only through Christ that we can be redeemed from that. But in order to begin on that path to being forgiven of your sins, you have to believe in the divinity of Christ. And that's basically what Christianity is. You believe that Christ is the Son of God. And someone once told me this. This is not my original bit of theological research, but I was told that without Christ, God is inapproachable and incomprehensible. Without the concept of God in the flesh, we as finite, limited beings cannot come to understand him. So that's about all I have to say about being saved through Christ, being a Christian. It's a pretty simple concept, and it's one that can be explained a lot more eloquently by somebody who has studied theology more thoroughly than I have. But I sincerely thank you for the question, and I'm going to answer a similar one, and thank you to this person. It's from Alex. My question is if, in your opinion, cultural, if not necessarily religious Christianity is vital to the survival of the West. If so, how would you define cultural Christianity? I find the idea of religious Christianity being different from cultural Christianity very bizarre. Because while you might have people engaging in the ritual of baptism and observing of the Christian holidays, I don't view those as, I just view those as superficially cultural. There's no real sincere drive behind celebrating those things. And if there's nothing backing up the observances and the baptisms and the rituals and whatever else, it's just pagan. It is of this world. And it's usually just a self-satisfying kind of thing. It's not bringing you closer to God in any way. And the worship of the self is really what is proof that we have gone away from cultural Christianity, even though we might pay some lip service to it in holidays and things of that nature. And I doubt that many people now are religious Christians either. I mean, they might go to church or whatever, but they don't sincerely believe the things that are taught in the church. But I think that religious Christianity and cultural Christianity cannot be separated from one another. And I don't think that much of what is in the West right now is Christian at all because of the massive amounts of narcissism that I'm seeing. We need to abandon the self and dedicate a life to God. And you do that through helping others. I sincerely think that like the times I felt closest to God was when I was in some kind of small group and my influence could be felt upon it. It was as if God was giving me a purpose. So to make a very general statement on what will save the West, yes, cultural and religious Christianity, because they're, like I said, inseparable. Yeah, we need more of that, but we can only achieve that if we give up ourselves. Reminder, in case you have a short memory, I have an email address now where you can send your questions, inquiries, media, bookings, whatever you want to commonfilth@commonfilth.com. If the emails start getting too much to handle for one email account, I will start setting up new ones. But for now, I just have one, and that is commonfilth@commonfilth.com. In fact, I'm going to put that up on the title card once I upload this, once I edit and upload this. So you will never forget it. I'm not going to name who sent this question because I don't know if they'd appreciate me giving out a first name even. So here we go. I have a question, so here it is. I am a trans girl, but I have a decent job, read the Bible, and strongly support right-wing political parties and nationalism. Are people like me still the degenerates that are ruining society, or is being trans acceptable so long as one doesn't promote LGBT equality and lives a regular conservative life? Thank you for the question. I don't recall ever thinking that trans people are what's bringing down society. I simply believe that it's a problematic symptom of a greater disease. And the diseases which I've addressed are dysgenic breeding, society being too large, too complex, and too meaningless, amongst some other things which I'm probably blanking on right now, but we'll move on. Even if trans people didn't exist, I would still find the society in which we live very problematic. I also feel the same way about homosexuality and feminism. Even if these things didn't exist or exist in a far less significant capacity than they do now, the causes would still remain. But does this mean that I agree and accept these things? Absolutely not. So while we can agree on religion and nationalism and things of that sort, we aren't going to agree on your particular life choice. And that's all I have to say on the subject. I think I've made my thoughts clear and thorough. But that's just for this show. If you'd like to continue the conversation with me through messages, I would very much welcome that. Next question is from Mr. Ardeval, if that is the correct pronunciation for it. I would like to know your opinions on independence, Catalonia, Scotland, etc. I'd also like to know what you think about what people call cultural genocide, France, Sweden. Breaking off from territories that previously contain you, I think, is natural because certain people, if given enough cultural separation from the host culture, will eventually start becoming their own people. They will become separate people from which they came. An example of this that Americans would be most familiar with is America itself. In the 1700s, we became different people from the British Empire. We were no longer Brits. And of course, there were some catalysts that got the Revolutionary War set into motion, but I think that's the general underlying cause of why America became its own entity. For this reason, why America split from Britain back in the 1700s, I think that the South should have been allowed to form its own state as well. So I am all for a subgroup of people declaring independence. I think we need more separation. To borrow a word from our enemies, I think that it would create more diversity, a healthy kind of diversity. As for people who embrace their own genocide, I don't have much affection for them at all. I made fun of Sweden before. I've never made fun of the French before, so I'm going to do that now. In France, they don't keep racial statistics. You know, who's being born in their country. These weak white frogs, they don't see race. But unfortunately for them, biology does. Biology has told us that there is a significant population of children being born with sickle cell anemia in France. And who has sickle cell anemia? It is not the French, not the native French, but the Africans. So France is allowing themselves to be swallowed up by the third world hordes. Though the French do have a generation identity, which is like a right-wing group of French youth who've done some good things. At least a couple years ago they did. I'm not sure what they're doing now or if they've been co-opted by somebody else, but there are at least some people in France who I can respect. Next question is from Sam. How do you feel about how men are portrayed in the media and in social situations as of late? I'm not speaking of the extreme male shaming seen on sites such as Tumblr, but the standard view across the nation that being a man means eating snacks in a man cave, being obsessed with sports, and being confusing. How do you feel that male bravado is being portrayed as melodramatic in these times? Women, gays, and Jews control the media. It's made by them for them, largely. And what exactly do those people know about being a man? So, of course, they look at what their dad did maybe after a hard day of work. Maybe their dad would choose to reward themselves with some time alone in his den or man cave or whatever it is. You know, eating a nice snack and enjoying a baseball game or something. And maybe you can debate the morality of doing that. But maybe that's all that particular person had to numb the pain of the dehumanizing shit that they do on a daily basis to provide for their family. The pain of doing some emasculating job for 8 hours a day to put money in Junior's trust fund for college so that they can go get some stupid bullshit degree so that they can be a production assistant on some commercial that portrays him as some kind of asshole. Fuck you, Dad. I'm gonna make fun of you. That's what these kids think. These portrayals you're talking about, I find them probably as just distasteful as you do. But I feel that's what you get when you buy into the consumerist lifestyle, an economy that bases success on how much stupid shit people are buying. But this is a great question and one that's really not asked enough. But you don't hear about it too much because men don't complain. That's not our job. It's the women's job to complain. It's the man's job to fix whatever the source of the complaint is. So how do we fix what we see as a distasteful portrayal of men in television, movies, whatever? It's simple. We stop giving them our money. If they have no money, if they have no eyeballs, they cannot survive. I had a Netflix account for a few months, and then I realized that half of what they had on there was just some left-wing propaganda. You know, they had all the TED Talks on there. They had ridiculous television shows which promoted ridiculous agendas. Come to think of it, it was probably more than half what they had. But I'm not going to keep a track of that because I've canceled it. They do not deserve my money. To conclude this answer, I agree, and there's my solution, and I hope a lot of other men start following suit. I am not made for this heat. Evolution did not intend for me to bake in the 90-degree sun. It's not so bad if you stay inside all day, which you do when you're a kid. Summer's a good time if you have air conditioning. And I'm thankful that I did and that I do, but I don't like staying in all day. Driving is a much more pleasant experience when your car is not a crock pot. But you're not here to hear me talk about the weather. You're here to hear the answer to Dingus's question. As I mentioned earlier, Dingus did some art for this episode, which you saw around the 10-minute and 1-second mark. Dingus wants to know, if you could create a superhero, who would fight against the filth in this world? What would his name be? And what are his superpowers? How dare you assume that my superhero is going to be a boy? Check your privilege, shitlord. To be serious about this, I don't have a name for my superhero, but my superpower would be to detect anybody that has ever had sperm up their ass and eliminate them. I think the comic book companies might be working on the inverse of that right now. It'll be like a gay black Latino with HIV that goes around and pauses the neg holes of those homophobic bigots. I don't think I'm making that up. I think that Spider-Man is that now, at least last I heard. I don't keep up too much with the comics, so anybody who has the misfortune of keeping up with the comic book industry in the 21st century, let me know what's what. Sean wants to know, what's a good time period based off of your idea of a perfect society? Any time where I could be born and live and die in a place where I wouldn't have to worry about meddlesome bureaucracy, horrible culture, bad neighbors. I would want to live in a time where I could carve out a small but meaningful existence as a farmer or some other kind of laborer. Any time period that would allow me to live a quiet, peaceful, mind my own business kind of existence. I can't give a specific time period that would apply there, but I'm sure there are plenty. Trevor posted this to the timeline, or whatever Facebook's calling it now. Posted it to the timeline of one of my pages. If it was revealed to all the public of Western civilization that there are higher-ups that most people have no idea of, Bilderbergs, Rockefellers, who have more control than they should on social aspects of Western civilization, media, finances, what would be the usual reaction to this reveal? I thought it wasn't some big secret that the Rothschild family owned every central bank in every country, basically every country. There are a few that they haven't entered yet. But I guess that's not, information that most people would think to seek out. And I think somebody responded to your post on the timeline that most people would just toss their hands up and say, "So, what's wrong with that?" And if you need to explain to somebody why so much power in the hands of so few is a bad thing, then they aren't really worth talking to. So I agree with that person. There's a lot of this information that's out there. You could go look for it. But even if people did think to look for it, they would give that answer. What's wrong with that? I don't see the problem with that. Who cares? So it's very upsetting, and the fact that most people don't care is why they're allowed to get away with it. Next question is from Ted. He writes, "What is your opinion on life outside of the Earth? What if we made contact with alien life? How would you react to a newsline stating such an event?" With how expansive the universe is, I definitely think there is some form of life out there, but I don't think it's quite to the level that we have here on Earth. The biodiversity that we have here on Earth is just astounding, and I think that it's unparalleled in the universe. And if we found a planet like ours with our kind of life on it, not exact, I know that evolutionary changes would differ at least slightly. So we wouldn't see a parallel to a human, at least an exact parallel. But just in terms of the complexity in life that we have here on Earth, if that were found in another place, I would be very surprised. But it would not change my worldview or make me question it, because my beliefs, I think, rest independently of the existence of alien life, whether it exists or not. Got another question from Kellen here. One more click. Do you think virginity is something to be cherished for both males and females? And if one but not the other, why? If we're going to look at the etymology of the word, there cannot be a male virgin. It only applies to females. But I don't like the idea of going around and banging whores or being a whore, because it's gross. There are a whole host of health problems associated with it. But I mean, on the other hand, if you avoid human contact with the opposite sex, I think that's a sign of brokenness on some level. So everything in moderation, and I think that monogamy is the answer. I think that monogamy is the middle ground. People on like Robot 9000, they miss the point. The fact that they aren't getting sex is just a sign that they're broken and don't know how to interact with people. Their virginity is a symptom of a greater problem. And even if they do get sex somehow, they're still going to be the same person. It's not going to change them overnight. There's more I can say about it from like a religious perspective. If somebody's saving themselves for marriage, if they're doing it legitimately, if they're not using it as a rationalization, like they can't get girls or a girlfriend or whatever, and they're like, "Oh well, I'm saving myself for marriage." At that point, it's a rationalization and it's bullshit. But for the good Christian boy who found a girl through the church and wants to do things the right way, I have a lot of respect for that. There's a lot to be said for suppressing animal urges for the sake of a higher power. This one's from James. What do you think about today's youth and the sub-mainstream popular culture that seems so pervasive today? By sub-mainstream, I'm referring to the shit you typically find in a Vice article. Also, why is modern society and pop culture so apologetic and defensive? Take this Nicki Minaj bullshit, for example. People criticized her new album art, and it spawned a legion of pop news articles, from HuffPost, Vanity Fair, etc., defending her new album art. Why is this defensiveness such a common occurrence these days? I don't like Vice very much. I've liked a couple of the documentaries that they've done, but that's about the extent of the admiration that I have for them. And as for the sub-mainstream cultures that they cover, they're interesting to an extent, like the this weird trailer park kind of thing in the middle of the Californian desert owned by some teachers union, where they followed some guy and he bought meth, and it was really bizarre but uniquely American. I believe the place they visited that I just described was called Slab City, and it's full of the worst kind of genetic refuse you could find anywhere that's unique to America. Why are people so defensive and apologetic now? because they know deep down they're shameful creatures. Like, I don't know about this Nicki Minaj thing. I don't follow pop culture much at all. Everybody has a very warped sense of values and ethics, and it's starting to show that, like, people defending the indefensible, which I don't know if this was or not. I'm completely unfamiliar with this. But I do remember that one comedian talking about if he had a gay son and what he'd do if he had a gay son. And because of what he said, people were offended, and he was forced to go on some media apology tour from GLAAD. Nobody really cares because apologies aren't funny. They're not funny, they're not entertaining, and they don't work. In fact, I think they might even make them worse. Apologies might make the situation worse. What you should do is agree and amplify. That way, there is no ambiguity as to where you stand on a certain issue, a certain controversial opinion that you hold. What's the worst thing they can do? Call you a homophobe? Call you a racist? Call you a sexist? A real person, at least a real man, isn't afraid by those things. And if that's the worst thing they can say about you, their arguments are bogus. But I don't know if that's directly related to this question or if it answers it in a satisfactory fashion. Is it really worth my time to look into this Nicki Minaj thing, though? I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like modern pop culture at all. I'll just pretend that it's still the 80s and Crowded House still has songs on the US charts. I'm like the 90s kid equivalent of the 80s. I was barely there. I have no idea, no memory of it whatsoever. I'd like to take a moment to encourage everybody to look at the description below this video and check out some of the links that are there. Every episode I put a lot of links down there from the artists that allow me to use generously for free their artistic works. I'm certain that they'd rather get paid some amount of money to have their music or artwork in the show, but I don't make any money at this either, and they're understanding of that, and I would hope that you would reward their generosity by giving them some of your time because they certainly earned it. There are talented people out there, and I do my best to feature the most talented amongst them on my show. It would be a dream of mine to eventually have the money from the show to start paying people for their music. But until that day, the least I can do is get you to like their page and get them some more popularity so they have a better chance at getting booked at a gig or getting a commission. The people I feature aren't worthless Tumblr bloggers with a PayPal donate button on the page while they bitch about the patriarchy and think the world owes them a living because they write mind-blowing blog posts. The fine folks that I put into my show in some way, they actually make something and they put themselves out there, and that takes a lot of bravery, and I respect them a lot for it. We live in an age now where anybody can say the nastiest kinds of things they want about a person, and I don't understand that mentality. You go out of your way to find something that you don't like and then get really pissed off in a public way over it. No one cares enough to be interested in constructively criticizing somebody's work, actually helping rather than just trying to cut somebody down. If these people knew how much goes into creating something and how much of somebody's soul gets put into an artistic endeavor, they wouldn't be so nasty about whatever kind of thing they don't like about it. And I'd like to acknowledge that there are a lot of questions that I said I would answer for this episode to the people that sent them to me that I'm going to save for next week. There are a lot of names, so I won't give them out. I won't list them. So if I didn't answer your question this week, I will answer it next week. I still have all the questions that I got from this week saved on my list, so sorry that you have to wait another week, but I will definitely get to them. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sending in your questions, and here are the credits for this episode. Artwork by Feminist Tears and Dingus. Music by Yahan, Parisian Youth Culture, Ox King, and Coma Black. Complete works by artists featured in this episode can be found in the links below.